Okay, continuing on with what was read before, which is under the category for bureaucracy of bureaucracy bureaucracies as implementers. So they implement law, carry it out, and it talks about why they're not successful. So we've already talked about the design of the program, lack of clarity from Congress, lack of resources, money, staffing, lack of authority and ability to subpoena, do recalls, and now we're under administrative routine. For most bureaucrats, administration is a routine matter most of the time. They follow standard operating procedures, better known as SOPs or SOPs, to help them make numerous everyday decisions. Standard rules save time. If a Social Security caseworker has to take the time to invent a new rule for every potential client and clear it at higher levels, few clients would be served. Thus, agencies write detailed manuals to cover as many particular situations as officials can anticipate. The regulations elaborating the Internal Revenue Code compose an IRS agent's Bible. Similarly, a customs agent has binders filled with rules and regulations about what can and cannot be brought into the U.S. duty-free without taxing it. In addition, I don't know if they say SOPs or SOPs, so I'm going to say SOPs though. Bring uniformity to complex organizations. Justice is better served when officials apply rules uniformly, as in the implementation of welfare policies that distribute benefits to the needy, or in the levying of fines for underpayment of taxes. Uniformity also makes personnel interchangeable. The Army, for example, can transfer soldiers to any spot in the world, and they can find out how to do their job by referring to the appropriate manual. So no matter who is in the job, whoever's in the position working, and I want to think of state ones. I'll use an example for state bureaucracy is Child Protective Services. They have standard operating procedures on how to handle different circumstances with alleged abuse. And that way they're not, as an individual, a CPS caseworker is not just going, maybe what should I do about that? And then either overreacting, underreacting. It can tie their hands, and it can be frustrating because they have to follow the rules for CPS, the caseworker. But on the other hand, it creates uniformity, clarity, allows you to do your job without second guessing yourself. Routines are essential to bureaucracy, yet when not appropriate to a situation, they can become frustrating red tape or even potentially dangerous obstacles to action. And that's like CPS. CPS, Child Protective Services, has certain rules they have to follow on what is neglect, what is defined as neglect, what they can do as far as removing a child from home. That can be frustrating if they want to do more. But it has its benefits because you don't have to memorize or know or come up with on your own every example out there. An October 1983 terrorist attack on their barracks outside Beirut, Lebanon, killed 241 Marines while they slept. I don't remember this. This is when I was young. A presidential commission appointed to examine the causes of the tragedy concluded that, among other factors, the Marines and the peacekeeping force were, quote, not trained, organized, staffed, or supported to deal effectively with the terrorist threat. In other words, they had not altered their SOPs regarding security, which is basic to any military unit, to meet the unique challenges of a terrorist attack. The FAA's protocols, routines for hijackings assume that the pilot of a hijacked aircraft would notify an air traffic controller that there had been a hijacking, that the FAA would identify the plane, that there would be time for it in NORAD to address the issue, and that the hijacking would not be a suicide mission. As the September 11th Commission put it, these SOPs were unsuited in every respect for the 9/11 terrorist hijackings. This was well known. One of the problems with September 11th, too, was that CIA and FBI were not communicating well with each other. But the standard understanding of a hijacking at that time was that the hijacker wanted something. So they would land the plane and ask for something because that's how it had been done before, not to see it as a suicide mission. Now, we need to be understanding that hindsight is 2020. We do the best, I would argue anyway, that sometimes you do the best you can, and you don't have a new SOP until a new event happens. And think of technology that way. Not as technology changes, as communications change, yes, SOPs have to be updated, but we have to respect that not everyone sees everything coming, and it's easy to judge the past, but at the moment, it made sense. At the moment, what a hijacker was made sense. Now we know, where the flaws were, but that's after the fact. Sometimes an agency simply fails to establish routines that are necessary to complete its tasks. For example, the General Accounting Office found that the FAA failed to determine whether the violations its inspectors uncovered at aircraft repair stations were ever corrected. The FAA did not keep the proper paperwork for adequate follow-up activities. Okay, so that's a hurdle to implementation. The next hurdle, administrators' dispositions. Bureaucrats operate not only within the confines of routines, but often with considerable discretion to behave independently. Administrative discretion is the authority of administrative actors to select among various responses to a given problem. Discretion is greatest when rules do not fit a particular case. And this situation is common, even in agencies with elaborate rules and regulations. Some administrators exercise more discretion than others. Street-level bureaucrats, that's a test question. You need to know what a street-level bureaucrat is. To refer to those bureaucrats who are in constant contact with the public, often a hostile one, and have considerable discretion. They include police officers, welfare workers, and lower court judges. No amount of rules, not even in the thousands of pages as with IRS rules, will eliminate the need for bureaucratic discretion on some policies. It is up to the highway patrol officers who stops you to choose whether to issue a warning or a ticket. So, if the highway patrol officer picks and chooses who to give a ticket, the opposite is to tell them everyone you stop has to get a ticket. Well, then you've taken away their discretion. That might not be the best case to handle pulling people over. Or what if they choose not to pull people over because they don't want to give tickets at that moment? Or what if there is an extenuating circumstance? It leads to unfairness. The person who gets the ticket versus the one who was able to talk their way out of it. So it can lead to unfairness. Also, who pulled you over? Some people are more lenient than others. But on the other hand, the opposite would be, okay, they always have to give a ticket. And that might not be the best policy either. I'm also thinking of the mask rules. Right now, restaurants are getting fines and different by when people call them in that they weren't following the rules about shutdown for COVID. Well, I can only assume, I don't have my facts on this, but I can only assume that there was discretion, that maybe on the unfair side, maybe something was ignored because someone was a friend of somebody, or they didn't want to go, they didn't really want to punish them, or they don't feel good about punishing, whereas then you have the one who wants to punish everybody. And that can be unfair. And it also can be dangerous, because if you don't punish someone, so to speak, give them a fine, something later could happen and you could be at fault that you didn't call the restaurant out for serving in building, or in the restaurant, inside dining. Maybe you can get in trouble because you didn't follow the rules as a street level bureaucrat. But also, different circumstances maybe require different outcomes. Maybe they just need to be talked to, and then they'll clarify the rules and people will follow them. Lots of different options here. street level bureaucrats, and lots of different consequences on their ability to pick and choose enforcement. Ultimately, the way bureaucrats use discretion depends on their dispositions toward the policies and rules they administer. Some of these policies and rules may conflict with their views or their personal or organizational interests. When people are asked to execute orders with which they do not agree, slippage, this is a test answer or a test question right here, is likely to occur between policy decisions and performance. A great deal of mischief may occur as well. Street level bureaucrats, like I'm saying, may pick and choose whether or not they agree and want to enforce COVID rules, or pick and choose who they give tickets to. On one occasion, President Nixon ordered Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird to bomb a Palestinian Liberation Organization hideaway, a move Laird opposed. As he later said, we had bad weather for 48 hours. The Secretary of Defense can always find a reason not to do something. The president's order was stalled for days and eventually rescinded, taken back. He didn't want to do it. The defense secretary found excuses. And is that good or bad? I don't know anything about this particular action, but you'd have to look it up. Controlling the exercise of discretion is a difficult task. It is not easy to fire bureaucrats in the civil service, and removing appointing officials may be politically embarrassing to the president, especially if those officials have strong support in Congress and among interest groups. In the private sector, non-government, leaders of organizations provide incentives such as pay raises to encourage employees to perform their tasks in a certain way. In the public sector, however, special bonuses are rare, and pay raises tend to be small and across the board. Moreover, there is not necessarily room at the top for qualified bureaucrats. Unlike a typical private business, a government agency cannot expand just because it is performing a service effectively and efficiently. So they can't grow job positions. I would say President Trump had no problem firing people. Typically, like it says here, what if Congress likes them? I would think of General Mattis, who was the Secretary of Defense. He resigned. I believe he was asked to resign. And even though he was looked upon favorably by Congress and Department of Defense, Trump's views were always that I can fire people and I'm going to fire them if they don't do exactly what I want. Typically, though, that's a little more rare. I don't know if it'll be as rare in the future, though. In the absence of positive and negative incentives, the government relies heavily on rules to limit the discretion of implementators. As former Vice President Gore put it in a report issued by National Performance Review, because we don't want politicians, families, friends, and supporters placed in no-show jobs, we have more than 100,000 pages of personnel rules and regulations defining in exquisite detail how to hire, promote, or fire federal employees. Because we don't want employees or private companies profiteering from federal contracts, we create procurement processes that require endless signatures and long months to buy almost anything. Because we don't want agencies using tax dollars for any unapproved purpose, we dictate precisely how much they can spend on everything from telephones to travel. And whether you agree with this or not, these obstacles that were created, you'll hear about Trump that he was a norm buster, that he broke the norms of the executive branch. And typically people who like Trump have no problem with this. People who don't like this, don't like it, and or don't like Trump. But I will say he didn't have a problem hiring his family. He didn't have a problem with connections between private companies, his companies, hotels, and with government. So he broke from those rules. And then, so I would say many people that maybe did care wouldn't do anything about it because of their support for President Trump, or because so many people did support President Trump. And in the future, you'll have to make a decision whether or not we should care about these issues, whether there should be a different an ability to constrain the executive, as in the president. For example, his son-in-law Kushner was not granted a security clearance. There are rules on security clearances, but Trump overrode those. That standard operating procedure and said, no, he's going to get it. I want him. So, should that matter or not? Should the president be able to be told, you can't, this is the security clearance, you don't have a choice? Or should a president, as the head of the executive, have that choice? Anyway, moving on with this, often these rules end up creating new obstacles to effective and efficient governing. As U.S. forces were streaming towards the Persian Gulf in the fall of 1990 to liberate Kuwait from Iraq, the Air Force placed an emergency order for 6,000 Motorola commercial radio receivers. But Motorola refused to do business with the Air Force because of a government requirement that the company set up separate accounting and cost control systems to fill the order. The only way the U.S. Air Force could require that much needed receivers was for Japan to buy them and donate them to the U.S. So these are the obstacles set in place by rules. What rules are a heavy burden, what rules are unnecessary, what rules are unfair to the president. You could probably, I assume, write a book about that. The next issue that causes implementation problems, and the last one in the book, is fragmentation. Sometimes, as we saw in the regulation of food, responsibility for a policy is dispersed among several units within the bureaucracy. The federal government has had as many as 96 agencies involved with the issue of nuclear proliferation. Similarly, in the field of welfare, 10 different departments and agencies administer more than 100 federal human services programs. The Department of Health and Human Services has responsibility for basic welfare grants to the states to aid families. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, provides housing assistance for the poor. The Department of Ag runs the food stamp program, and the Department of Labor administers training programs and provides assistance in obtaining employment. I read a short article recently that, why would a member of Congress from New Jersey want to be on the Ag Department's committee? Or it wouldn't be Ag Department committee, excuse me. The Committee for Agricultural Committee, which oversees the Ag Department. One, because they actually do have quite a bit of farming. New Jersey is not just cities, but also keep in mind, it's an example. There are also other issues like food stamps. It's not just agriculture. And by the way, the person who is now the head of the committee, agricultural department, the committee chair in the Senate is Michigan's Senator Debbie Stabenow. And I believe, might have mentioned before to you, agriculture is her hallmark issue. She works quite a bit with ag in Michigan. It's our second sector after the auto industry. And she has a long history of overseeing as well as writing the budgets and laws about agriculture. And now she's the head of that department because the Senate is controlled by the Democrats. The resources and authority necessary for the president to attack a problem comprehensively are often distributed among many bureaucratic units. In 2009, the National Security Agency, the State Department, and the CIA has separate bits of information that Abdul Mullah Talib, and I'm sorry, I cannot say his name, was a potential threat to the U.S. Nevertheless, on Christmas Day, he was allowed to board a plane to the U.S. with explosives hidden in his underclothing. The agencies had failed to share and connect the dots among the various pieces of information. That was also an issue for September 11th. They weren't communicating with each other. Now, this is 2009, this case, so thought they got better. I don't know if they're better since 2009. I know they're aware of the problem. More broadly, consider border security, an important element of Homeland Security. In 2002, prior to the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security, at least 33 departments and agencies had responsibility for protecting America's borders. focusing on threats ranging from illegal immigrants and chemical toxins to missiles and electronic sabotage. It is difficult to coordinate so many different agencies, especially when they lack a history of trust and cooperation. Moreover, there are often physical obstacles to cooperation, such as the largely incompatible computer systems of the ICE and Coast Guard. Once the borders have been breached and an attack has occurred, many other officers get involved in Homeland Security, including hundreds of state and local agencies. So this is all fragmentation, fragments. Every piece is all over the place in different different agencies, different departments. That was the purpose of creating Homeland Security. After September 11th, they were able to move quite a bit of it all under one department to make it less, hopefully less fragmented. You'll find, and I don't know if I talk enough about this in our class, history, war especially, is when we get change. COVID might lead to the same results, change. It's easier to push change through when there's a crisis. September 11th made it easier for Congress to deal with those who would have to keep the status quo for their reasons. September 11th helped push, hey, no, we need to change this. And you might, again, see that with COVID. Not sure yet. When the BP Deepwater Horizon spill occurred in the Gulf of Mexico, Americans learned that although the federal government owns the ocean up to 200 miles off U.S. shore, Washington had no central body directed with making decisions about how to explore, map, preserve, exploit, and manage it. Disaster struck, and the nation watched in dismay as dozens of offices and agencies with jurisdiction is a word that's going to come up with courts. It's your ability to deal with something. Jurisdiction and the courts are your right, the ability of the court to hear the case. They have jurisdiction. Jurisdiction here is the right to deal with the issue. Jurisdiction over slices of ocean activity, environmental, offshore drilling, national security, science, scrambled to take control. But the bureaucrats were mostly at the mercy of the only people with the expertise to plumb the Gulf's depths, the BP engineers. At the height of the crisis, Obama issued an executive order. You'll need to know what an executive order is, pulling together the 24 separate offices and agencies housed in the Commerce, Defense, Energy, and Interior departments, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and elsewhere, and required them all to report to a new umbrella entity, the White House's National Oceans Council. So they saw a problem with BP, with this oil spill, and how to deal with it, and so he moved to work together under this entity. If fragmentation is a problem, why not reorganize the government? Why not fix it? The answer lies in hyperpluralism and decentralization of power. Remember, when something sounds illogical, when something does not sound logical, chances are, and remember this for everything, there is a logical reason, even if you don't understand it. There is a reason why it's this way, even if you think it's silly. And once you dig into that, you might have a better chance, one, to understand it, to not be so, for us to be so judgmental for what we don't understand, but also to fix it. If you figure out the problem, it's easier to fix it instead of just rolling our eyes and saying, well, that's stupid. Why are they so dumb? There are reasons. And so here we go. Congressional committees recognize that they would lose jurisdiction over agencies if these agencies were merged with others. So if I'm a member of a committee and I have oversight responsibilities, why would I want to give that up to somebody else? I have control over that part of the food chain. I don't want to give up control as a member of the committee. That's first. Interest groups do not want to give up the close relationships they have developed with their agencies. So if I am working close as a airline industry, think of hyperpluralism, and I have built that relationship. Think of Microsoft, when I gave you that example of why they give PAC money. Think of any group like that. They know who they have to talk to. They know who they have to make connections with. It's the iron triangle or sub-government, which you need to know. And it's also hyperpluralism. They don't want to lose that contact and that relationship with a change in bureaucracy. So they're going to fight it too. Agencies themselves do not want to be submerged within a broader bureaucratic unit. Moreover, most bureaucratic units have multiple responsibilities, making it difficult to subsume them under one organizational umbrella. So they don't want to lose their power, so by moving them to be under some other department, but they also might not fit neatly under a different department or an agency. The Food and Drug Administration doesn't want to lose its authority because it stands by itself if you were to throw it under the Department of Agriculture. So you cannot emphasize enough that everything is working against change. Every person group who has a stand or a stake at what is being done doesn't want change. All these forces fight reorganization, and they usually win. Clinton's proposal to merge the DEA and the Customs Service met with immediate opposition from the agencies and their congressional allies. Pursuing the merger became too costly for the president, who had to focus on other issues. They say higher priority. But again, you're president for 4 years, maybe 8 years. You have many other issues to deal with. Your bureaucrats who work there are resisting. Congress members are resisting. Interest groups who work with those agencies and Congress are resisting. It's one of those pick your battles. Nevertheless, under the right conditions, reorganization is possible. Following the attack September 11th, Bush concluded in the summer of 2002 that the only way to overcome the fragmentation of agencies involved in providing homeland security was to create a new department. I actually have read that it wasn't just Bush. This was in the works and talked about, just like if COVID creates change, that change isn't something someone hasn't thought of. They just weren't able to get it done. And Bush and his administration saw a chance to get it done, and as well as Congress saw a chance to get it done. The idea wasn't like brand new. So Homeland Security was created in 2002, the largest reorganization of the federal government in half a century, 50 years. Fragmentation not only disperses responsibility, but also allows agencies to work at cross purposes. For years, one agency supported tobacco farmers. I love this. You see this often. And if you want to know why, or if you want to roll your eyes when you see it in the media, there's reasons. Okay. One agency supported tobacco farmers while another discouraged smoking. So you have one helping the farmers, and they happen to grow tobacco, and then another group fighting and getting smoking out of the American public. Opposite agendas here. One agency encourages the redevelopment of inner cities, while another helps build highways, making it easier for people to live in the suburbs. Or they put that highway right through a city, inner city. One agency helps farmers grow crops more efficiently, while another pays them to produce less. I think of farming and sugar. We have a sugar problem in this country. We eat too much, drink too much sugar, and it causes health problems. And then so we have Health and Human Services fighting health problems like obesity and diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And then on the other hand, we're helping farmers grow corn, which is what is created for fructose, high fructose corn syrup. Opposite goals here, but federal government is doing both. As long as Congress refuses to make clear decisions about priorities, bureaucrats will implement contradictory policies. And I will leave this one to this. I'll leave this section to this being the end.